In the early morning haze of a forgotten town, a golden retriever emerges from the mist carrying an unconscious boy across his back. No one knows where they came from or how the dog saved him. But buried beneath the bruises and silence lies a secret that was never meant to surface. What unfolds is a journey of rescue, hidden experiments, lost children, and a bond forged beyond language. If you believe love can survive the darkest places, then this story will stay with you long after it ends. Now, let us take you into the world of Miles, Maya, and Valor. Fog clung tightly to the mountain town of Elmridge, as if it were hiding a truth too heavy to speak. It was early spring, but the wind still carried winter's bite, curling through narrow alleys and around the crumbling stone arch of the old train station. On most mornings, the place stood deserted, a monument to silence and forgotten time. But on this morning, a figure appeared. He did not arrive by train or car, but on foot from the woods behind a long-abandoned factory, a path few dared to walk. A golden-furred dog stepped out from the mist, its coat matted with dirt and its eyes scanning the world ahead. Draped across its back, fastened with a torn strap, was a child. Small, unconscious, barely wrapped in a tattered flannel shirt. The boy shifted only slightly as the dog stepped forward, leaving wet paw prints on the cold stone. Archie Mays, the station's aging janitor, had just unlocked the waiting room doors when he saw them. He froze, still gripping his mop, unsure if the cold was playing tricks on his eyes. But the dog did not vanish. It stood at the top step, breathing heavily, then carefully crouched so that the boy could slide off onto the ground. Archie stumbled forward. The child was no older than 7, his face pale, one eye swollen shut, wrists ringed with bruises. What stopped Archie in his tracks was the mark on the child's arm, a strange circular symbol fractured like broken glass. It looked burned into his skin. "I'm calling for help," Archie muttered more to himself than the dog. The animal remained still, watching him with a gaze that was neither aggressive nor afraid, but filled with something that felt almost like memory. When the ambulance pulled in minutes later, Riley Hart was among the responders. A nurse recently relocated from Boston, she had not yet adjusted to the quiet tempo of mountain towns. Her usual brisk step faltered the moment she saw the boy. She bent beside him in silence. When the team moved to shut the ambulance doors, the dog growled deeply and low. Riley raised her hand. "He comes with us," she said calmly. "Label him emotional support if you need to, but that dog is not staying behind." The ride to Elmridge Medical was soundless except for the hiss of oxygen and the faint raspy breath of the child. Riley sat in the front seat, glancing back more than once. The boy had not opened his eyes, but his small hand had curled tighter into the dog's fur with every bump in the road. At the hospital, when the nurses removed the boy's shirt, they gasped. On his chest was a second mark identical to the first, but drawn in black ink rather than burned. Riley snapped a photo and sent it to her cousin Jacob Hart, an archivist at the State University. A minute later, a message came through. "That's not just ancient. That symbol is classified. Government restricted. Are you somewhere safe?" That night, the child remained in the EQ, silent and unmoving. The dog, whose tag identified him as Valor, lay curled beneath the hospital bed. Staff came and went, but none could bring themselves to force the animal to leave. Near midnight, a nurse walking the quiet hallway happened to glance at the security feed. The camera above room 3 flickered. For 2 full seconds, the screen turned to static. When it returned, the child had shifted just slightly, and the word Echo had appeared faintly on the inside of the window pane, drawn in chalky white. No one could explain it. But Valor lifted his head and stared toward the door. His ears stood straight, his eyes focused on something no human could see. As if from far away, a signal had arrived, and only he had heard the call. Morning light filtered slowly through the hospital windows, a pale and uncertain glow that struggled to warm the walls of room 3. The boy had not stirred since his arrival. Machines beeped softly beside his bed, measuring breaths and heartbeats that came too slowly. Nurses entered with quiet steps, adjusted wires, whispered to one another in clipped tones. None of them could explain the chalk word still visible on the glass, and none dared erase it. Echo. It remained like a whisper sealed in frost. Valor had not moved from the boy's side. He lay with his head resting near the boy's hand, his body still and alert. Every so often, the child's fingers would twitch slightly in the golden fur, a reflex that seemed more like memory than instinct. The bond between them was wordless but unbroken. When doctors approached, the dog did not growl, but his eyes followed every movement with the intensity of a sentinel. He was not just watching, he was guarding. Later that morning, Dr. Nora Ellis arrived. She was a behavioral trauma specialist sent from the city after hospital staff flagged the case as high priority. In her mid-40s, with short auburn hair and sharp eyes behind reading glasses, she had the posture of someone who had spent her life among broken stories and silent survivors. She entered room 3 and paused in the doorway. The boy was smaller than she expected, the bruises deeper, but it was the dog that truly held her attention. She knelt beside him, hand extended. Valor did not flinch. She studied his collar, reinforced nylon, military-grade stitching, the kind used in tactical training. She gently turned the tag. The name Valor was etched in block letters beside a series of faded numbers. Beneath it, a second tag was tucked flat against his chest. It bore a symbol, a triangle within a circle, surrounded by 6 points. Her breath caught. She had seen that once before. Years ago, during her internship with a psychological research project focused on deep response patterns in children exposed to trauma. A project with government ties. The files had vanished from public record soon after a lab fire in 2013. She had always suspected the fire was no accident. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small scanner. With a whisper of apology, she hovered it near Valor's collar. A soft beep echoed. Embedded chip detected. Unknown encryption. No ID match. She frowned. It confirmed what she feared. This dog had a past, and it was not civilian. Back in her office, she opened her laptop and keyed in the partial symbols. No results in standard databases, but deep in her private archive, hidden within a folder labeled discontinued, a file blinked open. Project ECA. Initiated in 2009. Purpose: Adaptive Canine Imprinting for Nonverbal Trauma Support. Classification: Level 5. Status: Terminated. Personnel: Redacted. Dr. Ellis leaned back in her chair. Her thoughts swirled. The dog was not just trained. He had been part of something larger, something erased. And the boy. There was no name yet. No match in any national missing child report. His fingerprints yielded no results. Facial recognition returned nothing. To the system, he did not exist. And yet, here he was. That evening, a visitor arrived at the hospital claiming to be from Child Protective Services. A woman in a gray blazer with a badge clipped to her coat and a nameplate reading Cardenas. She asked to see the boy. Her papers looked official. Her voice was calm. But Dr. Ellis noticed the way she scanned the room. Not with concern, but with intent. She asked few questions. Only whether the boy had spoken. Whether the dog had shown aggression. Whether the symbol had been recorded. When Dr. Ellis told her they had no formal identification yet, the woman's eyes darkened slightly. She left without incident. But Ellis watched from the window as she stepped into a black SUV without markings and drove off into the dusk. She called the number listed on the woman's ID. The line did not exist. Back in room 3, the boy stirred. Only slightly. His eyes fluttered but did not open. Valor lifted his head and pressed his nose gently to the boy's cheek. A sigh escaped from the child's lips. Just one word. Barely audible. Home. And then silence again. But something had shifted. Outside the hospital, a figure stood across the street, half cloaked in shadow. He wore a long coat and watched the window of room 3 with stillness too precise to be casual. In his ear, a receiver crackled. "We found him," said a voice. "Begin extraction protocol." It was well past midnight when the storm rolled over Elmridge. Rain slashed against the hospital windows in waves, wind howling through the vents like the breath of something ancient. Most of the town slept unaware. But inside room 3, the boy awoke. No alarm sounded. No machines beeped out of rhythm. He opened his eyes slowly as if waking from a dream too deep to leave behind. His gaze drifted across the room unfocused until it landed on the dog. Valor raised his head at once. Their eyes met. The boy reached out with a hand so fragile it trembled under its own weight. His fingers curled into the golden fur and held tight. Then, without a word, he sat up. The oxygen line slipped free from his nose. His feet touched the floor. The machines continued to hum as if nothing had changed, but something had. Down the hall, Dr. Ellis sat in the small observation office, reviewing security footage from earlier that day. She had paused the video just as the strange woman in the gray blazer left the building. There was something wrong with the footage. In frame 27, the woman's shadow stretched across the floor behind her. In frame 28, it vanished. And in frame 29, the same shadow appeared again, but facing the opposite direction. She leaned closer. A flicker of movement in the lower corner caught her eye. A man standing across the street, watching. She zoomed in, but the pixels refused to resolve. His face remained hidden behind blur and static. Suddenly, the alert tone on her screen blinked red. Movement detected, room 3. She froze, then bolted from the chair. As she reached the door, the hallway lights flickered once, then steadied. A power surge. She rushed past the nurse's station, her badge clinking against the lanyard. Room 3's door was slightly ajar. Inside, the boy stood barefoot on the tile floor, his hospital gown too large for his frame. He was staring at the window. The rain had smudged the word Echo into a smear of chalky lines. Valor stood beside him, ears high, tail stiff. Dr. Ellis stepped in slowly, keeping her voice soft. "Hey," she said, "I'm Nora. You're safe now, okay? You don't have to go anywhere." The boy turned to her. His eyes were far too old for his face, deep and knowing, like he remembered something he should not. He didn't speak, but lifted one finger and pointed to the closet door behind her. Nora glanced back. The closet had been locked all day. She approached and placed her hand on the handle. The lock had been forced. She opened it cautiously. Inside sat a small duffel bag. Not hospital issued. Not labeled. Someone had hidden it. She pulled it into the room and unzipped it. Inside were a change of clothes, a sealed envelope, and a burner phone. The envelope bore no name, only a symbol. A fractured circle crossed with a single vertical line. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "They will come for him. Do not trust uniforms. Do not trust silence. He remembers more than they want. Keep him with the dog. Only the dog can anchor him." Nora felt the chill rise through her chest. The boy had moved back to the bed, now sitting quietly beside Valor. She knelt beside him. "What is your name?" she asked gently. He didn't speak, but reached for the marker left on the bedside table and began to draw on a blank chart. His hand moved slowly, but with purpose. When he finished, he turned the pad to her. The drawing showed a facility. Underground. Long hallways. Rooms with numbers. A central chamber surrounded by lights. And in the center, a shape. A dog. The same shape repeated over and over. Not just Valor. Others. Nora's hand trembled slightly. She looked up. "You were there, weren't you?" He nodded once. "And others like you?" His face darkened. Then he pointed to the bottom of the page where he had drawn a circle with 6 lines radiating outward. In the center were 3 letters. ECH. Before he could finish the final letter, a loud bang echoed through the hallway. Not thunder, a door slamming. Nora grabbed the boy and moved to the wall. Valor stood in front of them, hackles raised. Outside the room, a pair of heavy boots stopped in front of the door. A soft metallic click sounded. Nora held her breath. Then footsteps moved on, fading down the corridor. Inside the room, the boy looked up at her, his voice barely above a breath. "We have to go. They know I'm awake now." Rain continued to fall across Elm Ridge like a veil meant to hide the truth. Street lamps flickered in the distance and puddles glimmered beneath the amber glow. Inside the hospital, the night shift moved with weary precision, unaware of the storm unfolding on the 3rd floor. Room 3 stood quiet again. But it was a stillness laced with tension, as if the walls themselves were listening. Dr. Nora Ellis sat beside the boy with the burner phone in her lap. The device was locked with a fingerprint scan. She tried his hand gently. The screen lit up. No code needed. A file opened automatically. It was a list of names, each line marked with a birth date, an assigned number, and a status field. Most read inactive. A few said unknown. One said terminated. Near the bottom was his. Miles. Status active. Assigned designation Echo 17. She swallowed hard and glanced at the boy. His eyes had not moved from the window. Valor stood at attention beside him, unmoving, as if he were waiting for a signal. Miles turned slowly. "We can't stay here. They'll come when it's quiet, when the shift changes." Nora stood. "How do you know that?" "Because they always did," he replied. "Before." Valor stepped forward and nudged her hand with his nose. It was enough. She slipped the phone into her coat and pulled the spare clothes from the duffel bag. He dressed in silence, moving carefully. His limbs were stiff but purposeful, like a dancer remembering a routine buried under pain. They moved quickly. Nora led the way through the emergency stairwell. At that hour, few staff wandered the lower floors. Most were changing shifts or filing paperwork. They reached the basement exit without alarm. The security panel blinked green as she swiped her badge and pushed the door open into the back lot. Cold air rushed over them. Valor stayed close to Miles, guiding him like a shadow given life. Nora opened the back door of her car and helped Miles inside. The dog followed instantly. She slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine stuttered once, then caught. As the wheels rolled over wet asphalt, she saw a dark SUV in the mirror pull out from a side street. No headlights. She took a breath and whispered, "Hold on." They left the town behind in minutes. The road twisted through low hills and wooded turns where branches scratched the windshield. Nora glanced at the boy through the mirror. He was clutching the dog's collar tightly. His voice came soft. "They never meant for us to live normal lives." She didn't answer. Her hands tightened on the wheel. After 20 miles, she turned onto an old service road that led to her grandfather's cabin, abandoned for years but still stocked with essentials. They arrived just before sunrise. The fog had lifted slightly and birds were beginning to stir. Inside the cabin, Nora lit a lantern and pulled blankets from the old cedar trunk. Miles sat on the floor beside Valor, both of them watching the fire grow in the stove. The warmth began to push back the chill in the room, but not the weight in their eyes. "Tell me what they did to you," Nora said softly. Miles looked at her, then at the fire. "They broke us into pieces so we would fit their purpose. But something stayed. Something didn't break." She nodded. "And the others?" "Some were lost, some escaped. One sent Valor." He reached into the duffel and pulled out a small card tucked in a side pocket. It bore a symbol Nora recognized immediately, a fractured sun with a narrow eye in the center. Below it, one line of handwritten text. "You are not forgotten." Nora turned the card over. Coordinates. Somewhere in the forest near a place called Gray Hollow. "This is where it ends," she said. Miles shook his head. "No, it's where it begins." Behind them, Valor stood and faced the door. His ears twitched. Outside, the wind had shifted. Something was coming. The storm had moved east by dawn, but the woods surrounding Gray Hollow remained soaked in its memory. Trees dripped steadily and mist clung to the earth like breath from something sleeping beneath the soil. Inside the cabin, silence reigned. Not the peaceful kind, but the silence before movement, before decisions. Nora stood at the edge of the map spread across the wooden table, her finger tracing the coordinates from the card. It pointed to a restricted area northwest of Gray Hollow, unlisted on civilian charts. Formerly a research station, now decommissioned. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and the only road in was unpaved and likely watched. Miles sat nearby with Valor pressed close against his side. The boy had not spoken since midnight, but he had drawn. Pages scattered across the floor showed images that chilled Nora in ways she could not explain. Children in hospital gowns, rooms without windows, symbols repeating like echoes. The most unsettling sketch was not of a person but a door, heavy, bolted, and bleeding light from the cracks. Nora collected the drawings and folded them carefully into a binder. She did not ask where he had seen them. Some memories should not be spoken aloud. She looked at him and spoke calmly. "We will go there, but not without knowing what waits." Miles nodded once. Then he reached into his jacket and removed something Nora had not seen before, a pendant on a black cord. The symbol matched the one on the card. He pressed it gently to Valor's collar and held it there for a full 10 seconds, then let go. A soft pulse emitted from the pendant. Faint blue, barely visible. "What did you do?" Nora asked. Miles stared at the floor. "I told the others. I told them I'm awake." Nora stepped back. "Others?" He nodded again. They're scattered. In homes, in shelters. Some are asleep. Some remember. The signal tells them it's time. Valor's not the only one. Before Nora could respond, the old radio on the counter crackled. She had not turned it on. It hissed, then spoke in a faint child's voice. "You're not alone." Then silence. Nora's heart pounded. She turned to Miles, but he was already standing, his face unreadable but focused. Valor had moved to the door, tail raised, ears pinned forward. From deep in the forest came a low hum, rhythmic, like a generator buried underground. The sound rose and fell in waves. The pendant on Miles's chest pulsed in time with the vibration. Nora grabbed her bag and slipped the burner phone inside. She looked at Miles. "Do you know what's out there?" "Yes," he said. "But I don't know who's still alive." The cabin door creaked as Valor pushed it open. The morning light was weak, filtered through fog and dripping pine. The road ahead was damp and empty. They stepped outside. 100 yards from the cabin, a fox darted across the path but paused mid-stride to stare at them. Its eyes glinted silver for just a moment before it vanished into the underbrush. Nora blinked. Had she imagined that? Miles whispered behind her. They watched through the wild ones. They always did. They walked without speaking. Valor led the way, nose low, eyes sharp. The trail cut between fallen logs and across 2 shallow creeks before narrowing into a ravine lined with moss-covered stones. After nearly an hour, they reached a hill overlooking the valley below. At the center stood a complex, concrete buildings half collapsed, satellite dishes rusted and tilted, fences broken. A facility long dead to the world. But from within, one window glowed. Someone was still there. Nora dropped to one knee and lifted binoculars from her pack. She scanned the buildings. No movement. Then on the 3rd floor of the main structure she saw it. A face in the window. A child. Watching. She lowered the binoculars. "We go in tonight." Behind them, the wind picked up slightly. The same humming sound returned, softer now, like a lullaby meant only for those who remembered its tune. Miles looked at the facility without fear. "She's inside. I feel her," Nora asked softly. "Who?" He turned to her. "My sister." Night fell without a sound. The forest around Grey Hollow grew still, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Beneath the shroud of pine and ash, Nora, Miles, and Valor stood at the edge of the clearing that opened to the forgotten facility. From this distance, the buildings looked like broken teeth jutting from the earth, their edges softened by years of moss and neglect. But not everything was abandoned. One window still glowed faintly, and that was enough. They waited until the sky turned black and the fog returned. It rolled in low across the ground like a slow wave, and with it came silence, the kind that thickens in the ears and tightens in the chest. Nora adjusted the strap of her bag and turned to Miles. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Miles did not speak. He pulled the pendant from beneath his shirt and held it out. The faint pulse of blue returned, steady, calm. He placed it around Valor's neck. The dog did not resist. Instead, he stood taller, the signal humming faintly through the air around him. They moved as one. No flashlights. No talking. Just breath and footfalls and the faint rustle of leaves. They approached the compound from the north side, where the fence had collapsed beneath the weight of time. Valor led the way, slipping through the narrow break without hesitation. Miles followed, then Nora. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted. Colder. Heavier. The main structure loomed ahead. 3 stories high, with crumbling cement and vines snaking through shattered windows. Nora found a side door half buried in debris. She cleared the entrance quietly and pushed it open. The hinges groaned but held. Inside, the air was stale, with a hint of chemical tang and something older, like mildew and rusted memory. They entered a long hallway lined with broken tiles and peeling paint. Old fluorescent lights hung dead from the ceiling. Nora held her breath and moved forward, each step echoing faintly in the dark. Miles trailed close behind, one hand brushing the wall as if reading it. Valor moved ahead in slow arcs, nose to the ground, tail stiff. They reached a stairwell near the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar. Behind it, stairs led down into darkness. Nora hesitated. There's no power down there. Miles placed his hand on her arm. There never was. They descended slowly. The air thickened with each step. Below them the humming returned low and rhythmic like the sound of something deep underground turning slowly in its sleep. The stairs opened into a lower level that did not appear on any of Nora's maps. The hallway here was narrower, cleaner, as if someone had been maintaining it. Red emergency lights glowed faintly along the baseboards, casting long shadows. On the wall, symbols were painted in black circles with fractured raised lines that matched those in Miles's drawings. Valor stopped at a door on the right. He sniffed once, then barked softly and looked back. Nora stepped forward and turned the handle. It clicked open. Inside the room was a cot, a small chair, a broken monitor, and on the wall above the bed a name etched in the concrete. M.E. Miles entered slowly. He traced the letters with his fingers. Meredith Ellison, my mother. Nora felt her breath catch. She tried to speak, but the words would not come. Instead, she reached for the folder in her bag and pulled out the photograph she had taken from the card. The woman in the photo stood beside a golden retriever puppy, the same pendant around its neck. Her face was calm, determined. "That's her," Miles said quietly. "She trained them. She hid us. Then they took it from her." Nora nodded. "What happened here?" He turned to her. "They built us like echoes, but some of us started to sing." Outside the room, something shifted. A sound. A door closing softly somewhere deeper in the hallway. Valor stiffened. His ears rotated and he growled low in his throat. Then from far down the corridor, a flicker of light moved. Not a flashlight. A lantern. "They're coming," Nora whispered. Miles turned and pulled her back into the room. "We go through the vent." He pointed to a small grating in the far wall, half hidden behind the cot. Nora knelt and pried it loose with her pocket knife. Dust fell in soft clouds. The opening was tight but enough. Miles crawled in first. Valor followed without pause. Nora went last. They moved through the narrow shaft in silence, broken only by their breath and the occasional creak of old metal. After several turns, the vent opened into a chamber below the facility. Nora dropped down first, then Valor, then Miles. The room was circular. At the center stood a strange machine, long dormant but intact. Around it were empty cages, each marked with a different symbol. One still held a single object, a child's drawing taped to the wall. Two figures, a boy and a girl holding hands beside a dog. Miles stepped forward and stared. She was here, Maya. Behind them, the vent shifted. Someone else was coming. The chamber was cold but not lifeless. The machine at the center stood like a forgotten monument, wires tangled across the floor and lights long dead. The cages around the walls remained open, except for one. Miles stepped toward it slowly, drawn by something deeper than memory. Inside, a faded blanket lay in a heap beside a crumpled paper cup and a bracelet made of string and plastic beads. He knelt without a word and picked up the bracelet, brushing off the dust with trembling fingers. The beads spelled a name. Maya. Nora stood still, watching him. She did not speak. Valor sat beside the boy, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the far wall. Then Miles turned. His voice came quiet but clear. She was here. She waited. This was her cell. Nora walked to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find her." A sound interrupted them. Soft at first, a scraping of feet on metal. Then a voice, low and hoarse. "Miles." They turned. From the shadowed entry at the far end of the chamber, a small figure stepped forward, barefoot, thin. Her hair tangled around her shoulders and her clothes hung like rags, but her eyes burned with something fierce. She looked no older than Miles, yet her presence filled the room like a bell ringing across silence. He stared at her, frozen. "Maya." She nodded once, then ran. They met at the center of the chamber, colliding in an embrace that knocked both of them to their knees. He clung to her like a lifeline, burying his face in her neck, whispering her name over and over. She cried without sound, fingers clutching the back of his shirt. Valor stepped forward and pressed his nose gently into her back, as if to confirm she was real. Nora watched, her chest tight, her eyes stinging. She stepped back to give them space, but then she saw it. A light blinking on the dormant machine. Faint, green, She moved closer and crouched beside the panel. It was powering up. Very slowly. Maya pulled away and turned to the machine. They left it running. It's how they tracked us. It's how they listened. Nora looked at her. Can it be shut down? Maya nodded. But not from here. Suddenly the far door slammed open. Light spilled into the chamber and voices barked down the corridor. They're coming. Miles grabbed Maya's hand. This way. They ran toward a second vent behind one of the cages. Valor lunged forward, teeth bared, and threw his weight against the vent cover. It broke free and clattered to the floor. Miles went first, Maya behind him, then Valor. Nora slipped through just as footsteps echoed into the chamber. She looked back once and saw the shadows enter. One of them carried a device blinking red. The machine behind them began to hum louder. They crawled through the narrow shaft in silence, broken only by the tremor of the metal beneath them. When they emerged, they found themselves in a forgotten corridor lit only by broken safety lights. Ahead stood a steel door marked exit. Nora ran forward and pushed. It opened with a groan. They spilled out into the forest behind the compound. Night had fallen completely. The trees were black silhouettes against a sky full of stars. The air was cold but clean, and for the first time in days it smelled like something real. Maya dropped to her knees and touched the ground. We're out. But Valor growled. Low. Warning. From behind them came a voice. That's far enough. Nora turned, shielding the children. A man stepped into the clearing dressed in dark tactical gear. His face was calm, but his eyes held no warmth. You took something that belongs to us. Valor stepped forward. The man raised a weapon. One more step and I will put him down. Before he could fire, a second voice called from the trees. I wouldn't do that if I were you. A flashlight beam cut through the dark and lit up the man's face. He froze. Out of the woods stepped Cole Benton, sheriff of Elmridge, his badge gleaming under the beam of his own light. He carried a shotgun in a quiet fury. Drop it now. The man hesitated, then lowered the weapon. Behind Cole came 2 federal agents, badges drawn. We have orders. They're safe now. The man backed away into the woods and disappeared. Cole lowered his shotgun and turned to Nora. I figured you might need backup. Nora nodded, heart still pounding. Miles and Maya stood together, holding hands. Valor sat between them, tail still, eyes watching the dark. Nora looked at the children and whispered. It's not over. Miles replied. No, but we're together now. Morning broke slowly over the hills of Elmridge. Mist still clung to the ground, but the sky had shifted from black to a soft silver that promised warmth just beyond the clouds. At the edge of a quiet clearing not far from the abandoned facility, a group of people stood in silence watching the sun rise. Miles and Maya sat together on a wool blanket pulled from the back of Cole Benton's truck, their hands intertwined, their eyes fixed on the light. Beside them, Valor lay still, his body pressed close to theirs, ears twitching with every breeze. Nora stood a short distance away, speaking with the federal agents who had arrived just before dawn. They had come prepared not with force but with files. The warrant had been signed overnight, triggered by a transmission from the machine deep in the compound. The agents had traced its activation to a network tagged decades ago under a blacklisted name, Project Echo, decommissioned, erased, but not forgotten. The facility had been secured by sunrise. Inside, investigators had found dozens of rooms, some untouched for years, some recently occupied. They discovered records on over 30 children, most marked with false names, assigned families, and behavioral rankings. Several names matched those on national missing person registries. Some were still active. Most were not. Nora handed over the drawings Miles had made along with the photos she had taken in the underground chamber. One agent quietly slipped them into a secure envelope without speaking. Another looked at Nora and said softly, "You did the right thing bringing them out." She didn't answer. Her eyes had drifted to the siblings and the dog resting between them. Later that afternoon, the group returned to the rebuilt Pine Hollow shelter, now renamed Haven Ridge. The building had been repaired with new windows, bright rooms, and a central courtyard where children now played. Leah Porter waited at the entrance, arms folded, eyes damp with emotion. She had feared the worst, but when she saw Miles step from the vehicle and Maya behind him, her face broke. She wrapped them both in a hug that said everything words could not. Valor was given a clean bed in the room next to theirs, a place of his own, though he refused to sleep anywhere but the space between their two beds. Staff began to gently introduce Maya to the routines of the shelter, but she always asked first where Miles would be. If he moved too far, she followed, not out of fear but out of memory. They had been apart for too long. Days passed. Then a week. Miles began speaking again, slowly then more freely. He answered questions. He asked some of his own. Maya remained quieter, but one afternoon she drew a full mural on the chalkboard in the dining room. It showed two children standing beside a dog, their faces turned toward the sunrise. On the bottom she wrote one word: free. Nora returned often, sometimes with supplies, sometimes just to listen. She brought Valor a collar engraved with his name and the word guardian, etched into silver. When she clipped it on his neck, the dog sat taller, eyes full of something ancient and calm. One evening Miles approached Nora in the garden. "Will they come back?" he asked. Nora crouched beside him. "They might try, but now we know, and now we are ready." He nodded, then looked at the horizon. "What happens to people like us?" Nora smiled faintly. "You write your own future. You choose who you are, not them." He thought for a long time before answering. "Then I choose to protect." She placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "And I will protect you." That night they held a gathering under the old oak tree in the courtyard. Children sat in a circle holding small paper lanterns lit from within by tiny candles. Each flame represented a voice once silenced, a name once erased. Maya stood in the center holding Valor's leash. Miles stood beside her. Together they stepped forward and placed a wooden plaque at the base of the tree. It read, "For those who survived the dark, and for those who led us home." The wind stirred and the lanterns danced in the breeze, casting golden shapes across the courtyard walls. Valor lifted his head once and let out a single deep bark, not loud, not sharp, but final. Like the closing of a chapter. And above them the sky slowly opened, letting the stars shine through. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this powerful story. Miles, Maya, and Valor is more than a tale of escape. It's a testament to courage, to love that endures, and to the silent guardians who lead us home. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next journey. We'll continue to share stories of hope, resilience, and the unspoken bonds that light our darkest paths. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next video.